Vicente, for being here. I'm really thankful for meeting you, for getting to know you a little bit this past couple weeks through some people in the tennis world, and that's exactly what I love about this. And I'm so happy to speak with somebody like you, super smart. You sound like a great guy, and that you have kind of a nice vision and a good idea about the world and life. So especially about tennis. So I'm excited to get to hear you, and I'm happy you're here.
Likewise, thank you for having me. It's great to speak with a like mind in regards to the sport, and I love what you've been doing with the different mix of characters in the scene and the sport. So I'm happy to be part of the list.
Awesome, amazing. So can we start just by telling me a little bit about your relationship with tennis from the beginning?
Yeah, so growing up, my parents both played it recreationally. My dad played it more than my mom. Uh, Competitively, I guess he played in like amateur tournaments at the club or that kind of thing. So I kind of grew up watching him do it. They put me on tennis school early on. I must have been like 6 or 7. I know that that's not early for tennis. Obviously, the people that are hardcore start at 3, but at 7, I went to Andres Gomez's academy. I think he had just retired. I got the foundations and that level of like training, but I didn't really like had passion or loved it as much. Put me into other sports like maybe basketball or like inline hockey, which was like a sort of like thing that was happening in the 90s, and I kind of like took, took a bit of that route. I also in the summers, summer camp, I guess my mom would send me to this other summer camp at some club in Salinas, which is like the beach town in Ecuador. And like, I mean, it was cool there because they had the Challenger event happening in there. So you could kind of see that and get the vibe of like the tennis as like a summer sport. And like, I would feel it and be part of it, but like in like a sort of like disconnected sort of way. But I was sort of like in between generations in terms of idols growing up. So Andres had just finished in 91, where I would have been like 7. And like, then Nico
And then you
Lapenti,
had Nico, yeah.
then he came and started sort of like jumped into the scene in 95 when he turned pro and peaked in 99. So it was kind of like that sort of transition, and you know, like kids pick up trends and stuff like that. So like in 99 when I was like 15, then me and my brother like took it more competitively. There was also like a closer level between both of him and I, like sort of like trying to train and do the stuff so we could play with one another. We're very competitive despite the age difference. He is more competitive than me. So it was cool because like I knew I was sort of like late in the boat to like join when I reconnected with the peers that I met when I was 7. Like, so it was like there was definitely a gap there that was sort of like lost for me in terms of not having played the under 10s, the under 12s,
Yeah.
the 14s, which are like critical stages in the development of a player. Size wise, I felt like I matched with them. The mental aspect of the game and that type of like pure competition I had missed, and it was
Right.
kind of like challenging.
I mean, if you pick up tennis back at that age and you start taking it seriously then, and you haven't competed and learned what that feels like, I mean, and then you kind of get into that age, which is 14, 15, you're a teenager, you start feeling your emotions even more. I mean, if you haven't really learned, how that feels earlier than that, it can be a little shocking for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, then when it became my focus and my main extracurricular sort of like activity, I definitely like connected with it 100%. You know, you start like doing the things that people do. You start following the tour. You know, you start kind of like reading results, watching matches, um, and training. And then I reconnected with Andres's academy, which had changed clubs, and it had been many years after. But it was nice to like, as I said, reconnect with this group of friends that I met early on, but just in like a more competitive, more focused sort of thing. People were starting to look at college as an option, you know, and like as a foreseeable thing. Other people who were the better ones were definitely considering joining the tour for a bit, you know, and like like I think that like fascinating thing about this sport is that there is always room for improvement. So like you can always like I had it was like I come to realizing like kind of like gauging and knowing how far you're going to get or
Oh yeah,
how. So it's a kind of accepting that harsh reality despite loving the game. So it was kind of like frustrating, but also exciting to know where I was gonna land. You know, it's like a plane approaching, and like you need to know where you're gonna land at some point. You know, so like
yeah. So
so.
being realistic is a big part of the sport. We all have dreams of becoming something or trying to be you know, a pro and whatever we see on TV and what we follow to actually get that love for the game.
Mhm.
But you know, sometimes it just doesn't work out, and that's kind of what I like to talk about, that long lasting relationship with tennis, and the why it stuck with you. So basically, you know, when you think about that, like, did you have specific dreams when you actually picked tennis up again, or you were just kind of like, I love it and I'm just gonna play and see what happens?
No, I was definitely like objective driven. Uh, I mean, I was training like 3 hours a day with conditioning and stuff like that. So we both, me and my brother, were in like a same sort of like strong program, having like going abroad and like completing a degree and being a student athlete was definitely a goal of mine. But
Mm-hmm.
the goal of matching the sweet spot between academics and like talent level of tennis was kind of like I saw there was definitely a disconnect there.
Yeah.
So I think that was somewhere where I had to make a sort of like a fast decision about where, because other of these peers or people in my group were taking recruiting trips to go to universities. Some were going to better places. Others were compromising with like a free education at like a Nowheresville school, you know, or like not Nowheresville, but like a school that is remote and like, you know, maybe they weren't so great for academics. Their tennis program was not as strong as like a D1 school or anything like that, an
Yeah.
AIA or D2, D3 even. Like, so I didn't feel like that was something that I wanted to compromise on.
And
And
what was your family pretty academic too?
they were, yes, definitely, but like my parents had not pursued higher education abroad. They both studied in Ecuador, so I think that was always that was why always for me going abroad and like completing a degree was like a goal. So there was a lot of expectations about that. So I didn't want to like mess it up, you know, because of like my passion or like the level that I felt that I had, you know.
Mm-hmm. So
But
basically, you kind of, when you were deciding to go to college, you had to make a decision, right?
exactly,
Between,
whether I was gonna continue playing tennis or not, kind of, you know, or like do it as like an intramural or kind of like a, I don't know, like hobby, I guess that's people word people like to use a lot for it. So it was yeah, that was definitely a clinching point there in terms of like the future, you know. I sooner or later realized that the dream was sort of like fading after having started late and blaming it a little bit on that and like, you know, just knowing that there was going to be a bit of like a plateauing there.
you definitely were frustrated between probably the emotion of liking it so much, wanting to do it, realizing it late, maybe because you didn't have potentially early education about the sport, or maybe your parents, you know, maybe didn't push you enough, or something happened there where you just didn't do it in those first years, and then you kind of got to those teenage years where essentially that's when, you know, the emotional intelligence has kind of been, you know, modeled a little bit through the years of playing tournaments earlier than that. So I can see the frustration. I can see how at that point when you went to college, you said, listen, you know, if I want to steer my future the right way, I need to be smart here and maybe leave some things behind. So
Exactly.
did you learn some things, like specific things that tennis taught you? I mean, you're kind of touching upon it now,
Hmm.
before going to college though.
Yeah, I think that definitely that hard work must come with focus. So like, because you can work hard, but if there's not a specific goal that connects with your kind of like objective, is kind of futile, you know, because you're putting a lot of like effort that is not funneled into something bigger or that connects with like the reality of your situation. So I think that that was definitely an eye-opening thing, a maturity thing that like kind of like happened, you know, when you especially put into perspective the fact that you're gonna lose the opportunity of something just because it wasn't targeted or it didn't happen this or that way, you know, a bit of the opportunity cost of it, you know, what had happened if I had done this, if I had done that.
I'm interested in knowing, like, what do you think failed for you to kind of have that gap in those years that you didn't pay attention too much to it, like personally?
I think taking the time to maybe be more strategic about matches and gameplay in general, just kind of like using focusing more on my strengths and like maximizing that. I didn't have like a sort of like a personal coach that would like whether would have worked on that. I feel like just the idea of an academy sometimes is not enough. I didn't have someone who pushed me in a way of saying, okay, you have a phenomenal serve. Let's just use that stuff and your drive to like win more points easily, you know? That from a technical standpoint, maybe I think would have been interesting to have someone who would have been able to detect that and work on that in a targeted sort of way.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's
yeah.
fragile when you have the stories of people who had all of that and then they hated the thing. You know, they didn't really love it. Like connecting to the idea of loving. You know, like you have that framework behind you, and then the drive is not there for some reason. You know.
You know, there is a little fine line, right? Because there's very few kids that I've learned that I've met that they don't like it. You know, like just like, okay, not liking a sport when you're that young, you know, there's got to be something happening, because like tennis is not boring. I mean, if you make it boring, it's boring. Okay. And if you put pressure on the kid, then the kid's going to feel the pressure. If you don't, you know, get to know the player and you don't really understand how to listen, how to communicate, like there's things that can happen that can make it go wrong. But I think that's my point to this, right? Like we need more education with people around the sport that kind of have an idea from the get-go, from the beginning of the years of the kid, that listen, it's about staying in this really forever. I mean, tennis can give you so much. It's an opening of doors, it's friendships, it's experience, it's an investment in your education. It's like more people that speak like that, the why you're in tennis, right? It's, yeah, sure, it's winning, losing, you know, results, titles, being a pro, doing it with this racket, not doing it with this racket. That's all part of tennis. But why? You know, what can this sport give you later on? You know, how can it create you as a better person, as a better human being? Like if you have more people like that, I think just the vibe, the community, the brain of it is so much cooler. It's so much healthier, you know. We can go back to, so you started coming to the States, you kind of were a teenager then, you had to make a decision with college.
Exactly.
You know, you realized that you were going to focus a little bit more on your career, on your academics then. And what was your idea? What were you going to study and where were you going?
There was a bit of like fluctuating about going to school, but at that moment, when I was 18, about to go to college, I was thinking of doing industrial engineering. So I applied to a few schools and got into two schools that were kind of like the last ones in the list, and they were uh, where we might
In
have crossed paths.
Miami. In
Yes,
Miami.
yes, and then it was Penn State in in Pennsylvania State College. So
Mhm.
uh, I inclined more towards Penn State because I mean deep in my mind as I was going, I applied solely academically. I did not do recruiting trips, did not do anything. A friend of mine who was going with me to college, he was also playing. He had already reached out to the coach to do um, tryouts and stuff like that. But I was like, no, man, it's like a long shot. Why not? Why bother? So he made it to the team. He did tryouts and got into the team. And then all of a sudden, he was a student athlete at a D1 school. So I had to take a breather there and like ask my family for some counsel, like about what to do, cool my jets. And I mean, there was the best decision was that I asked my friend to lobby with the coach for me, and he did. He was a good friend, and he persuaded him to like do another round of tryouts. The team was like maxed out. They had like 8 guys already then, so it was kind of like a tight pack, and like he might have been the last reserve that he was gonna get. But I did the tryouts, beat everyone who showed up for them, and it was kind of like an agonizing 2 weeks, but I got through them, and like having made it to the team was like fantastic. You know, it was like now the 2 of us, we were kind of like the Ecuadorians in the team, and we were very like they were ranked 60 in the nation at the
that's pretty
moment. So it
good.
was like a good, it was like a pretty good moment because the team had historically like ups and downs, but like for the program that was kind of like a new beginning of the phase of the team. You know, like the recruiting got better, got a little more exotic. You know, they were getting players from other places and like getting more of like an international program. So
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, like going to the whole regime of practice and like 3 hours a day, weight room, stuff like that. I've never been in like better shape in my life, you know, and like the team camaraderie and like the friendships that were forged, the trips and all this stuff was really like a dream come true. I mean, you know, for having
Yeah.
started that late, having been able to bridge it that way was to me like my biggest achievement. So I think that was like a really special moment. Yeah, it was insane. You know, 6 a.m. track practices in facilities where Olympians train. You know, it's just like you had to like
Amazing.
knock yourself in the head and be like, is this really happening?
I never lost sight of how incredible it is and how many resources they have, you know, for anyone that goes through college. So it's it's my biggest advice to everybody. I think pretty much 95 to almost 99% people should go. I mean, it's a win-win-win-win situation in every regard that you can look at it. Is there any cool, valuable lessons that you actually learned that you can pinpoint while being on the team?
Yeah, I think that there's a backstage to the sport. You know, I think that like the challenge matches that we had internally, I think that sort of like competition within your own team was something that was like that was like a bit eye-opening for me, you know, because you're competing with someone who's like on your team. You then have to work together towards like defeating the opponent. But there was like kind of like a strong sense of competitiveness internally that kind of like pushed you, you know. And I think that is like what we see in competitions like Davis Cup or Fed Cup, or you know, like some of the team competitions in tennis. It's just like antithetical to it, but at the same time, in situations, it can be so empowering. That's I think
Yeah,
something.
I mean, and at the end of the day, it's a resource as well, right? So the
Mhm.
way that I would see it when I coach was, why wouldn't we compete against each other? I mean, we're one of the best players in the country, and we're all here together. So why don't we show each other, you know, what one great opponent that maybe another team will find, you know, in a tournament? Why don't we each other show each other what we can do and you know what that looks like? So I mean, it's no different than when you go to an academy or when you go to a place where you're trying to find good, you know, people and players to play with you and train. Especially, I mean, you're not in a team together, but it's just using the resource around you for when you have to go out there on your own and do
Mhm.
it. So,
Yeah.
anyway, so when you were at Penn State, you said you studied it was engineering. Is that what you said?
That's what I came in with the desire to major. I ended up
Mm.
majoring in economics through
Oh wow.
through, through liberal arts, yes, because uh, I mean, I mean, my family business is investment banking and corporate finance, so there was like a bit of a persuasion to a degree to like maybe shift towards that. But at the end of the degree, maybe semester 7, 8, I was convinced that that was not my calling. I took some electives in arts, a soul searching period in my life, and like yeah, tried like my own personal quest, because there wasn't really anyone who pursued art or design in my family in a direct thing. So I could understand my parents like not concerned, but like certain degree of fear of like me wanting to do that. But more sooner than later, they realized that it was in my nature, and like they became fully supportive of it, and like here we are today. So it's okay.
What did you do those years that you were soul searching?
I moved to so after I graduated college, I went to Ecuador, lived in Ecuador for like 1 year, and then I decided that I had to take a trip, and I enrolled in some programs in London at Central St. Martin's, which is a design school there, and I started working on my photography and kind of like design as well a little bit, and then I lived there for a year. I moved there between 2009, and was there between Madrid and London, so spent some time in Europe there. But then I moved back to Ecuador and sort of like opened up like a design studio and like did more commercial work along these lines of this skill set that I now had, and like did that for 2 years. And then I had enough work that I felt confident to apply to another program and I did in New York. And then I applied to the School of Visual Arts and eventually moved there, which is almost 8 years from now.
Nice. Did you continue playing tennis all this time, or?
Yes, totally. And like after college, I made my focus in my tennis to correct all of the things that I feel I had done wrong, or I had a different approach in my younger career, you know? So like just be stronger mentally, not let emotions get in the way of the game, and like kind of like watch more matches, and like kind of like really began following the tour like almost obsessively, you know, like watching a lot of matches and like rewatching old matches, like going back to the history of it and that kind of thing. So it kind of like became as like my sole focus outside of my practice, you know? So it's like a parallel thing that like has always been there. Also, I was like, when I was in Europe, I would go play at like parks, and like then it's funny meeting people that way, because you as a player, you know what's good level and what's not a good level, or what's your equivalent of level, you know? So it was kind of like seeing there or people walking by and seeing me and be like, yo, can I get your phone number, you know, like let's connect and that kind of thing. And then you realize that the other people have like cool backgrounds, you know, like I met like some great architect friends in London when I was playing ASCII Gardens course in East London, and like people that I still keep in touch with, and like our friendships that were forged because of tennis, and like then they have developed into something else. So I realized the power the sport had then in this sort of like more adult phase. That for me is like the right way of keeping it in your life. And like as I said earlier, it's the beauty of this sport is that it's like there's always room to continue to crack and tweak things. Like there's always a way of improving. I'm like, whether you're working on your forehand or your shot selection or stuff like that, that you can always try. So doing that in those years was kind of like the first moment in which I saw that. And then like since then, I haven't stopped. If anything, it has gotten deeper, and like the sense of community in New York has gotten amplified based on the degree of level that of people level, and like, you know, like just connecting it more to my work and my practice has been like a great opportunity, because New York is just such a place where you meet people from like many walks of life and with multi-talents in different realms. So it's cool.
It's incredible, and it kind of probably got your brain juices going. So you know, this is the part that I'm interested in now, which is kind of how did tennis start collaborating with you, and how did it sneak up in there for with your art and your
Mhm.
your designs and everything?
Yeah, I think that like going back to the point, I'll connect it with this, but like I think that's something that I think that I want to mention that has always been present in me um, has been that I always wanted to like watch tennis live, watch tennis at the highest possible level live. I think that like since the moment I had an opportunity, I remember I was 19 and my brother was training in Bruguera in Barcelona, and like we went to visit and we spent like a summer there, and like I decided that I wanted to go to the Marseille Open Tres in Marseille, and I was like, I'm gonna go to this tournament. I was like 19, and I hopped on a train in my less. I was 18, I think, and I hopped on a train in Europe by myself, and I was like just going to the tournament to see that stuff, and I was eating paninis on the street and just going to watch tennis and spend all day until they kicked me out. We went to the Miami Open earlier on when we went in Delray Beach. So I always had that. And I think that like just the act of going to the tennis tournaments and watching it up close like that is like an addiction. I'm sorry, but that I don't find it any other way. But because I think it's like it's one of the activities that can raise your level so much, so fast.
Mhm.
You know, watching
Mhm.
it to me is one thing. Sure, it helps, but like watching it live is just like it's just an unlocking level of many things. So I definitely knew since that early moment that I wanted to have that um, thrill throughout my life, you know, and it's something that I compare it, I mean, it's performative, of course, but that connects with art and that connects with like rock concerts as well. You know, I cover and I've been stranger for like, for both, for tennis images and for rock concerts. And it's just like that level of like high level performance that is just like so medular, you know, like you take it in like, it gives you adrenaline. So
Mhm.
that I fought for like the most in my life for like getting opportunities along those lines. But like people like, for example, people from like Racket Magazine, my friends, Dave and Caitlin, like they share that same passion, you know, and I met them
Yeah.
on a tennis court. Whenever we meet, because we're talking about a story and anything like that, it happens on a tennis court. So it's just like, it's like-mindedness that has managed to help me bridge like-mindedness and passion that have managed to help me bridge both things, you know, and like with them, like for example, I propose going to a tournament to go document certain things, you know, like go get like a B side of tennis, which is very in the ethos of the magazine. You know, it's kind of like the B side of tennis or the historical aspects and these sort of like deeper references to like art or the glamour of tennis or the forgottenness of like forgotten heroes. It's been phenomenal, and I'm happy to call that work. You know,
Yeah.
that is
So
related
fun.
to my passion. You know.
Yeah, for sure. And what's your, when you're taking tennis pictures, or when you're thinking of combining tennis with your art, what's usually your sentiment behind this? Like, you want to do what with this? Like, what do you want to give the world with your art through tennis? You know?
Well, I think that the tennis is analogous to many things in life. You know, I think that there is something of like the game aspect of it that like correlates with life about being down and then being up and then being down and then being up, and that sort of like seesaw aspect of it is like kind of like interesting. The not giving up, the knowing that not until you lose match point the match is over. In terms of my work, I like the meditative aspect of the game, the pace, the sounds of it, the crowd, and all of these things I find exhilarating, you know, and it's just like, it's sometimes an emotion that I cannot describe. You know, I sometimes put matches running in the background just to have the screeching of the shoes or the bouncing of the balls, just to like kind of like send out, you know, it's just like, it sounds funny, but it's just, it's the reality. That's how it
No,
goes.
I don't think it's funny. I think it's so interesting. I think it's super cool the way that your creative mind and your eye and your visual eye is kind of sees tennis and uses tennis truly as an art. And as a player myself and as a coach myself, it's kind of like a different eye to it, but I've always had the eye of you know, the lines and the angles, and you know, we talk about obviously shoes and rackets, and but there's other ways to talk about that. And there's,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, for me, I mean, sitting down in a tournament, right? Like when you're sitting down in like a chair, in a random chair in a big tournament, all you can hear is tennis balls. And I think that is for me, it's just like you said, it's accelerating. It's like what's happening, right? Like what,
Yeah.
who's playing, who's out there.
Mhm.
Even when you go to a club, to just a random club, when I go to work and I kind of just open the doors and I can hear what's happening, it's just, it's full of stories. I think it's that's why I'm talking to you. I think that's why it's unbelievably cool, and just to know that you've put that together in beautiful work. And I mean, I've seen your work. I'm sure there's many things that you can tell us that you've done. Why don't you
Yeah,
tell me
well,
what else you've done?
yeah, I'm gonna kind of like walk you a little bit through like the approach. I mean, I guess that was kind of like my more like pure visceral reaction to tennis, you know, because there's so much to be said about like the sounds in tennis. You know, it's just like the way that a ball gets hit, you can tell the pace, you can tell who's hitting, you can tell if it's a serve, you can tell if it's a volley. There's so much like subtleties to that aspect of knowing the game at the high level or the club level or whatever level you wanna gauge it by. But in regards to my work, I mean, like I've worked there's two bodies of work that I have created surrounding tennis. One sort of more have come into fruition recently after inspecting years of photographs of work. So I've been photographing tennis or things related to tennis from like covering on like a court straight up like sports photography to abstracted work for, I'm gonna say, at least 8 years, 7 or 8 years doing so. So probably even more. But
Mm-hmm.
like just from the archive that I've gone back to recently is at that span of time. Uh, my first body of work surrounding tennis was called Stasis, and I was sort of like fascinated. I mean, I did a little bit of street photography, which kind of like just a term for which people like define the capturing of like people in the city and dense cities and like movement and like kinetic energy of like kind of like the pace of these like multicultural, fast evolving sort of cities. And 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 I definitely wanted to translate a little bit of that energy in the tennis into tennis, because I find that it was just like I saw like the players at the high level being sort of like machinery almost, you know, because their training is so precise and so like and so yeah, like perfect in a way that it kind of like it's just very little things that make a difference. And I was sort of like fascinated in that moment that happens between the second that the ball leaves one's racket till it arrives to the other player's racket. So um, I was using this technique that is called dragging of the shutter, where you sort of like let the movement blur a little bit of like the thing. So I was trying, I guess what I was trying to say is like capture as much movement as I could in like a still picture, you know. So it's kind of like, think about it as like a video, um, a video in an image of sorts, you know. So that was
Yeah,
kind of what I was trying to do, to get that second of the moment leaving one's racket wherever it was going or wherever it was arriving. So um,
it's funny.
yeah.
It's funny you talk about, right, like the details that you look for. But at the end of the day, it's like an artist like you is looking at the details. A coach is looking at the details. A fitness coach is looking at the details of that same person, that same machine. And truly, at the end of the day, those details are the ones that give you the win over Roger, the
Mm-hmm.
win over, you know, like it's so interesting to me, like to see that, you know, from an art perspective, you also are looking at the art of the details in between, right?
Totally. It's
So
very, very,
fun.
very in there, and like you're there, you're watching the matches. Like some of the, I must have said that like the project was focused on only on professional tournaments. So you're there. You're kind of like trying to follow the game, but at the same time, so like captivated into these subtleties. So that was the first project, Stasis, where it's like these movement pictures. I have a bunch of them on my site that people can see if they want to see them. Different surfaces bring different results and such thing. And so a connoisseur, someone who's a player, would definitely pick up certain differences and like subtleties around it. Some people may even recognize the players, you know, because there's that anonymity in the project, you know, because like everyone, people would ask me, and who is it, and who is it, you know, it's like there's this sort of mystery because the players are like ghosts, you know, so it's a little bit of like their energy there, you know. I'm very into my work. There's definitely like a metaphysical aspect too, so I think that there's just like that sort of Shakti energy of the players on the court that I wanted to capture and like and have it live in this sort of like more artful kind of way. And then the second project has been more like, it's called, I recently called it Nets and Lines, and it's I like it as like a sort of like homage to the geometry of the sport, which is ever present. And from everything, you know, we were working with angles, we're working with lines, we're working with you know, tiers and zones and percentages and all this stuff. And like and I sort of like have gotten like a more what can we say it, a more microscopic analysis of this sort of area that like we all know, we all recognize, you know, and like kind of like how light tends to activate it. Light is also something that is obviously inherent to photography, but I am mostly concerned in like it activating architecture, it activating geometry. So it's kind of like a architectural dissection of the different corners and little areas of the nets and lines that make our courts. So it's kind of like a more sculptural, even at times, take on the tennis court. And yeah, it's been a few years of that as well. And I recently put out a small publication that I hope to create maybe more volumes of it, or like a more formal sort of like book version of it.
So
So
it's your book. You put it together.
I put it together. It's a very small book. It's like maybe like 24 pages, but yeah, it's the first time in which they have sort of like they have like operated together. It's a small little essay in which I talk about the kind of like that there are no real like straight lines in nature, you know. So it's almost like the court that is sort of like impossible place of like us light beings trying to like cope with straight lines, you know, and like so it's a bit of an ironic take on it.
How do we get the book? Or
Right now, I'm sold out of the first batch that I did, but I will put out a second version by popular request. So in my Instagram, I will announce it soon.
I mean, Tennis Between Lines is literally exactly everything you're describing. So I'm gonna need a copy.
Okay, we'll send you one. Don't worry.
Good. Write it down. Write it down.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? So yeah, it's very interesting because you talk about details and things about even the court. I mean, the field of play of tennis, which is where all these stories happen, right? And all the geometry and the lines behind it. And as a coach, I've always been so interested in it because it kind of defines the place that you're going to put together. It defines the stats that we end up seeing on TV. It defines, you know, how the ball is being hit, what happens to your opponent. Would you make him weaker? Would you make her, you know, feel this whenever you hit the ball at a certain pace and it lands here and there? It just, it so connects to what you're doing in such a different, obviously, eye, but it's part of winning. I mean, if you want to win, you need to understand. You need to understand the lines. You need to understand what they do, what angles and heights, and I always just kind of emphasize that. Awesome. So, what do you think there's so many roles you can have around the sport, and you've talked about a bunch of projects that you're doing, and you know this eye for things. I find it incredible. So what, if you could think about tennis in the big picture and more like commercial and you know, people, not everybody's into this artsy eye in
Yeah.
terms of like looking at it like super deep, but they like to see cool stuff and they like to see different stuff from the surface. So is there any project or anything that you've done together with tennis that it's more commercial like that?
Yeah, I think as a trend in general, brands are looking more
Mm.
at like aspects of the sport that are kind of like a niche, you know, or is more like arty, you can say in like a way, you know, there's
Mm-hmm.
more craft behind it. So last year for the U.S. Open, Yonex was planning on doing their first showroom in the U.S. and they
Mm-hmm.
were and they approached Racket Magazine, who then reached out to me as like an installation artist to try to like come up with like a design solution for it, and trust us and trust me to like come up with this sort of like half retail, half playing sort of room, and like I uh, I sort of like designed the space with like a small, like kind of like mini court in the middle, and installation that I sort of like came up with. That was really cool, and I think they really liked it because they then took it to Australia, which was kind of like a sculptural version of their logo. And for it, like, I mean, I was trying to sort of like emphasize the dynamic aspect of like strings and what strings are and what the texture that sort of strings have. So I made this huge logo of them, maybe
You have
like
a
7
picture
feet.
of it here? Can you show it?
Yeah,
That would
uh,
be cool.
yeah, I'll show it to you. That's a sculpture installation that I did for them. So it's all string. I got like 7 reels of string in this
Wow.
piece, and it was like amazing. You know, it was like
And it's
really.
it's it's their string, right?
It's their string, yeah. So you use like
Yeah.
three different kinds of string, and yeah, this is a showroom kind of what it looked like also.
Yeah,
So they
I
had their
see it.
string machine.
Yeah.
It was like a little bit of like a tennis lab, you know, crazy scientist lab, and like they were happy, and I think it was very on brand, and it's nice to have these brands that trust you. I mean, I hope for more brands to like embark in this sort of like that this way because it's cool, you know. I think that that's another thing about tennis that like it has been a sport that has always been like
Yeah.
threshold and pushed by technology, you know, like it's
Mm.
always like the game has always been at the maximum because it's pushing technology to the maximum with the racket materials, the ball materials, the ball size. And now we're so connected with like what you were just talking about, IT, and you know, and like statistics and all of these numbers that are so useful for players and coaches. And it's just
Mm.
like it would be nice to see that reach the common Joe a little more, you know, and
For
it
sure.
becoming kind of like natural so we can all like do better, you know, because I feel like there have been many of these technologies in the air, but none of them are stick. They don't stick. Like the
Hmm.
Babolat Play, I thought was like a cool product that came out like maybe like 5 years ago, and it was like the racket gave you some data. I mean, it was like very abstract data, but it was like data still, you know, and like, you know, you can make something out of it, you know, and like
Yeah, that never stuck though. I think
never,
maybe
the sensors have
maybe
gotten bankrupt like 3 times, you know. It's just like, I don't know, it's just like
yeah.
it doesn't stick. So
Maybe in a little bit. Now the stats are becoming way more famous. I
mhm.
think maybe. This is so much fun. You are an absolute stud. You are so fun to talk to. Your eye and your story is incredible. I think it's obviously going to continue growing. I'm
Mhm.
excited to meet you. I mean, you talk essentially everything that I'm passionate about on one of the branches about the sport. It's super exciting. I obviously congratulate you for what you've done so far, and I
Wow.
commend you to keep going. And I'm gonna get a book. One of those is coming to me,
Sure.
and
When
let's
when I go to Miami and we play, I'll bring it down.
yeah, I got court for you next to the beach.
Uh,
You'll get a nice sweat, nice workout. You'll go jump in the beach after that.
Excellent.
Yeah. So let's kind of finish it. I don't want to take too much of your time. Let's finish it with we usually do kind of like two questions, which is a motto, like a personal motto of yours that you kind of stick by when you're through some adversity.
Yeah. Um, it may be a bit cliche, but I think that like
They all are. Don't worry. They all the mottos are cliche.
it just persists. You know, I think that there's definitely persist. Like, you know, it's like not that this not giving up, but not in a sense that like that is like not giving up just like a fighting spirit kind of thing, but not giving up more of like if you're obsessed with something and you feel you have something, like just keep pushing it in like a way that like you continue to watch it evolve. You can only measure it every so often when you look forward and you look at the road that you have sort of like walked, and like you see that you're on track and you remain on track, and you will, it's just the course of things, you know, you just have to keep doing it.
And to quote Steve Jobs, you can only connect the dots backwards, can't you?
He couldn't
Right?
have more eloquently put it. I definitely
Yeah,
thought that it derives from that.
for
It's a
sure.
good one.
So, and what's an advice that you would give? I'm gonna say 15 because it was a critical time for you. So, 15-year-old Vicente.
I think it's definitely game related, but it's something along the lines of like tennis matches are won by the person who puts one more ball over the net. Like tattoo that in like my butt cheek or like my leg or something. That like, you know, like make sure that it's like in there. You know, that's the name of the game. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be better. The person who's gonna win is the one who puts one more ball over the net.